You let me know when it's live. Oh, here we go.
Hi, it's Elizabeth Willits here from Investing in Women, and I'm delighted because today I am being joined by Emily Frost from Power Project Coaching. I'm going to be talking all about what you can do if you hate your job and you're feeling stuck, you're feeling lost, and you don't know exactly what to do. So that's what we're going to be talking about on this week's Facebook and LinkedIn Live. As you are joining, if you can let us know if you can hear us all okay, that would be fabulous. Give us a like or an emoji. But it's Elizabeth Willits here from Investing in Women. We're live on Facebook and on LinkedIn with Emily Frost from Power Project Coaching. And the topic this week is I hate my job. What should I do? So thank you so much, Emily, for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you, to meet you, and to find out a little bit more about what your advice would be to somebody in that situation, because I'm sure we have all felt that at some point or other. So before we start, it'd be really good if you could just introduce yourself and explain what you do through Power Project Coaching.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Elizabeth, so much. That was really nice to hear from you. Thanks for having me today. I'm really looking forward to speaking to everyone in a minute. So yeah, as you mentioned, I'm Emily. I work now for Power Project Coaching, which is my own business, which I run, and it's been set up for nearly 12 months now, which is exciting. Previous to coaching, I worked in the charity sector for over a decade, mostly in fundraising and marketing teams. And I focus mostly on international development in my charity work. And then I had 2 kids quite close together, really needed some more flexibility in my working life. And I was always really interested about pursuing my own thing. And that's how Power Project Coaching was born.
Brilliant. And who do you help with Power Project Coaching? Who's your target?
At the moment, I'm working across the board, really. So sort of everyone and anyone. I'm not sort of gender specific with my coaching. I'm open to working with males and females. I'm working mostly with people who are just looking to grow or change their circumstances in some way and need a bit of extra support through it. So anyone that's sort of undergoing any sort of change or transformation in their career or in their life, that's when it's a really sort of good idea to connect with a coach and help sort of build confidence and resilience, and to sort of bounce ideas off around change, and also to be held accountable, which is often what people find is really useful with coaching. Someone who's sort of by your side, cheerleading you on and keeping you on the right path as you navigate any form of change in life. And change is coming all the time, so there's lots of different topics that arise in coaching.
Brilliant. So people that are going through change in their career and change in their personal life as well, and you would help them.
Yeah, exactly. So a bit of both, actually. Often work comes into it because it's such a huge part of someone's identity and life. So that often gets weaved into the coaching sessions. But it can also be issues outside of work as well. So a change of location, for example, can throw up lots of different sort of situations and changing elements of somebody's life. So again, that would be a really nice, time to recruit a coach or to work alongside somebody who can really sort of help you navigate the choices ahead.
Okay, and what was it that made you want to become a coach?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot, actually, and it's a really interesting one. I think in my previous jobs in the charity sector, they were very sort of purpose-driven roles, which was sort of the main reason that I pursued working in that sector. And it was extremely sort of fulfilling and satisfying for me to have a role in an organisation that was sort of genuinely changing things for the better for lots of people. And specifically in my role, I really enjoyed managing people and working within teams. That was sort of my favourite element of the role specifically. So I really wanted to try and enhance that and sort of build upon that. So I sort of took on a coaching course initially for my own pursuits to equip myself with some better tools and techniques of navigating change and sort of upskilling myself in leadership, building my confidence as an employee, and things like that. And also in my personal life, I had, like I just mentioned, had 2 kids quite close together. I was, entering motherhood, sort of taking on that big challenge in my personal life as well. So for me, sort of taking on a coaching qualification in a course, I felt would benefit both my working life and my personal life at the same time.
Yeah.
I was hooked immediately. I absolutely loved it. It gave me such pleasure and joy doing the course. And although I didn't ever think I would use it as an actual job, that's sort of naturally what's evolved. And I sort of took the plunge into coaching as a career and sort of changing completely away from the charity sector, and taking that on, which was an unexpected move, but one that I'm so pleased has happened.
Yeah. Oh, good. You know, sometimes you need a change, don't you, just to realise you were feeling quite stagnant before, uninspired, unmotivated,
Yeah,
and need
exactly.
to put yourself out of your comfort zone, try something new, and then you find, redirection and repurpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because it was such a pleasant surprise as well, it sort of reminded me that we don't always have to have this really sort of set career path, with
Yeah.
sort of everything planned out ahead of us. I think my career in my charity sector was very much on that route, and had climbed a natural ladder in that sector, which is great. And I'm sort of not, saying that's a bad route to take, but it also just showed me that actually, if you're just doing something for your own pleasure and pursuit, then that also can sort of take you on a different path, and a different path can also mean a really good thing as well.
Oh, good. So embrace hobbies.
Yeah.
So actually, we're going to talk a bit about what to do if you hate your job, but I suppose a lot of people worry about leaving their job because it's the fear of things unknown, the fear of stepping off the ladder, worrying that they will have to start again at the bottom of another ladder, or won't be able to get back on the ladder if they step off and it doesn't work out. So what advice would you give to somebody that was feeling that fear at the moment?
I think it's a really common feeling to feel, and that'd be my first point, is sort of you're definitely and absolutely not alone with that fear that you might be feeling. I think it's a universal fear that pops up so frequently with clients that I'm coaching. It's a really sort of common thread that runs through everything. So I think initially it can feel a really lonely and isolating feeling, but just to be comforted that often others have felt like that before you, and others will feel like that behind you as well. So just to take some sort of comfort in that. But hopefully the session today, I can talk through sort of a couple of really actionable and really clear and simple steps to kind of take you through, get you off the starting blocks. Fear often has a way of sort of paralyzing us and keeping us where we are. Even though we might really want to change, that fear can put up a really strong barrier. So hopefully today, with these actionable steps, you can start sort of moving forward slowly in the right direction, and that will hopefully squash that feeling of fear that might be in you at the moment.
Okay, so brilliant. So we're moving on now. So all your steps. So if somebody's watching this, they hate their job, they don't know what to do, they're feeling stuck, uninspired, unmotivated, sad. So yeah, fire away, Emily. What would be the steps that you would advise them to take?
Okay, so step number 1 of 5, clear and actionable steps. Number 1 is to basically stop what you're doing and to think, which might seem so obvious. And that's really what we're sort of doing today. This is the process of stopping and thinking, because you've actually logged in to this chat. So in a way, that's the sort of beginning part of the process. But if we're feeling miserable and we're hating our jobs and every day is like a slog, it's extremely difficult to actually just stop just for a moment. We get quite accustomed to just carrying on, even if we're feeling awful. And we can get quite used to feeling misery and feeling really down, and that sort of becomes the norm in our life. So it's really difficult to understand that there might be a more positive future ahead. It's sort of wallowing in the misery can become quite familiar and quite comforting. So the fact that you're stopping today and listening to this is an amazing first step. So congratulations for doing that. And the thinking part is really interesting, because actually once we've stopped just for a moment, we can engage a part of our brain that's going to start us thinking about actually what do we really want, rather than just carrying on in the sort of misery that we've become accustomed to. So the thinking side of it, there's a really small task attached to this thinking side of it, which I would really urge anyone to sort of do if they're feeling stuck, they're loathing their day to day, and they just don't feel happy in their job. And it would be to write 2 columns. What do you love about your job is the first part of the column. Again, just writing some things down that you really love. It's really easy to forget actually what we do love about our job. We might get caught up in the bigger picture of misery, but there will be some little elements in there which you do love. So it's trying to refresh and remind ourselves of that.
Or why you went for that job maybe in the first place. What was it?
Exactly, yeah. And sort of moving the fog away from this feeling of misery and looking for the glimmers of sort of hope and positivity that are right in front of you right now.
Yeah.
The second part is in the column is, what do you actually really hate? So the absolute reverse. What sort of really makes your blood boil? What can't you stand? What do you absolutely despise about that job?
Mm-hmm.
And to put that in the second column. So you've got 2 opposing columns next door to each other. As you start doing this list, you might be able to do loads that comes out straight away, or you might get quite stuck and really sort of be scratching your head about what to write in these columns. So you can do it over sort of a space of a week even, after meetings that you have, taking a moment just to fill in the columns, or at the end of each working day, even just taking 2 or 3 minutes to do it. Or after a one-to-one with your boss, taking a few moments to fill this in for a personal benefit. This thinking process and getting it out of our heads and writing it down, even that process in itself is hugely beneficial. It's just stopped you in your tracks and it's got you thinking. And that action, those small actions of completing those 2 columns, is the first step off the starting blocks.
Yeah.
It's the first maneuver towards a more positive future. So that would be my number 1. Get going, start a step. It's quite simple.
I guess some people might not hate their job, they just might hate the people they work with.
Yes.
Then that changes it, and that changes how they move forward, I guess.
It absolutely does, you're right. So as I go through the steps, that comes into its own in sort of step 3, that comment that you've just made there. So we'll kind of hone in onto the actual why, what is actually really going on with you. At that step. But the first one is just kind of getting these lists going, getting the brain working, getting you out of that paralyzed feeling that we often get when we're feeling really fearful and insecure about what we're doing. The first one is just to get the paper, start that sort of progress. And it's a really sort of cathartic feeling getting going. So the list building for me is really key and a great starting point.
Yeah.
The second point after that is really to sort of consider you and your values as an individual.
Yeah.
So alongside this list about your work, the loves and the hates, there's also a third component to kind of get these cogs moving, to feel proactive, is to reevaluate your own personal values in your life. So we talk about values all the time. It's such a buzzword. It's such a key word that everyone talks about. Organizations love talking about it. Lots of coaches always talk about values. So just to really simplify, actually, what is a value? What do we mean when we say this word all the time? Right? It's bandied around all the time. But really, it's your own set of beliefs and opinions that help to guide your life individually. And my values will be completely different to your values, for example, Elizabeth, and it'll be different to everyone that's watching today, has their own unique map of values. So what you believe in and what your opinion is, it's going to be sometimes really closely aligned to somebody, but it's never ever exactly the same as somebody else. So they are truly unique to you. Yeah. But we don't really talk about them that much. We don't really ever sort of think in our heads, well, what's mine specifically? What do I really think about life and how I want to lead it? It's that's a really sort of deep and meaningful sort of statement that a lot of people shy away from because they're not quite sure. But taking a minute to actually just write down what your values are can be, again, a really cathartic way of just starting to think about it. What do I want for my life? Like, what's important to me? Yeah. And if you really need a bit of a catalyst to get going with it, because it can be quite difficult to start with this value-driven list, is to think about people that you'd really admire. Why do you admire them? What's it about them that you love so much? Or is there an experience in your life that you still remember so fondly? Why? Why was that still resonating with you now? They're good sort of starter questions to help you start thinking about your values. Some other examples are things like honesty. Is being honest a really, really important value, or you're not so bothered? Or making a difference. Is that a huge driver for you? Or do you feel like there's something else that drives and motivates you? It's endless. But it's also giving yourself a really good indication of who you really are at this stage of your life now and reevaluating it.
I suppose that was the good thing about the pandemic, because it made people stop. People had to stop, didn't
Yeah.
they? Even if you were still working. I mean, I suppose if you were a key worker, then you probably didn't stop. But a lot of people stopped in some form or other, and then it gave them a chance to think and maybe reassess their values or understand their values a bit more. And I think that's why there's now great resignation. People are pivoting. People are thinking about what's actually important to them.
Oh, absolutely. That's totally right. And I think sort of it does also change throughout your life as well. So, you know, when you're sort of first entering the workplace, your values there might be quite different to how they are 10 years on or 20 years on. Or as you're approaching retirement, your values will be sort of shifting again then. So they're not really sort of set in stone. So it's good to just keep an eye on it. Yeah, exactly. Checking in with it as much as possible. But
like an MOT then, you know, it's something like to do every year or so.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that an annual appraisal at work? But I suppose it's something to think about doing, like a personal appraisal.
Exactly. Quite often with an appraisal at work, they're sort of analysing your skills and skill set in that specific job. And that's sort of the values of the organisation there you might be sort of, gauging on, rather than your own personal values. So this task number 2 of 5, is to really look at your own personal ones, which are sort of irrelevant to the organisational values that you might be working for at the moment. So again, this sort of concept of getting to know ourselves, sort of getting comfortable with like finding out who we are and what we want, is an excellent sort of second step in that process to sort of choosing and starting to look at options for what's further ahead. So by the end of this point, we've got a column of what you love and hate about your job specifically, and a third sort of piece of paper here about your actual, your personal values and what's really meaningful for you as an individual. So we're starting to get a really good sort of base foundation here of what we're actually thinking. When we're stuck in our heads and we're fearful and anxious, our thought process can just really slow down. So it's sort of invigorating those thoughts and feelings that we hold about things. So number 3 sort of really reflects back onto that comment you made of, I might like the job, but it's the people that are not quite right, or vice versa. I really love the people, but the job is not the right one for me. So the third bit is to really focus in, get really specific now about your current job. So it's looking back into that columns we've got of what do I love and what do I hate. Usually from looking at this, once we've completed it over a week or so, we can really start being a lot more clever about what is actually wrong. When we're just unhappy, it just feels big. We don't know how to break it down. By step 3, we're in a much better place to be able to look at it in a much more specific way. So looking at the what do I hate about the job. So for example, do you love the culture, but you really dislike the role that you're in? You've been able to probably identify that by this point by looking at your 2 different lists here. Or do you love the industry? You're really proud to be in the industry you're in, but you really don't like your boss and that relationship is not good. Again, we're honing down quite specifically now. So actually, we don't need to change industries and do something really huge and unachievable. It might just be starting to look at that relationship that you've got with your boss. That's the thing that needs to be mended. So it's giving us, again, the outcomes become a lot more manageable as well. Rather than I hate my job as a huge slogan, we can really start going, I don't like this bit. of my job.
Yeah.
That's what needs to change. So it's
Yeah.
making it, it's really sort of narrowing it down, which makes it feel a lot more, oh, okay, it's just that actually. That's what I can focus on changing and improving. It's
Yeah.
not, I hate my job and I hate everything about it. That's very rarely the case. It's often just small individual bits of the job which might need a bit of a spotlight on and some sort of maneuver to start changing.
Yeah.
So again, that can feel like a huge relief. Like, thank gosh, we don't have to throw everything out in the air and start all over again and go right to the bottom of another ladder, take huge pay cuts, you know, all of that sort of damage that can come with doing a huge maneuver like that. Often it is just a small sort of part of the role or the culture or the organization or some of the colleagues that you're working with, those relationships which need some working on. So again, it's a bit of a relief there, which is really brilliant. The fourth step to sort of build on that is then investing in making that specific change.
Yeah.
So once you've identified what the problem could be, looking at like, okay, this is what I need to do about it. So looking at sort of the results now of that. So if it's sort of maybe an internal problem, looking at which department in your organization can help you, who can support you.
Okay, so reaching out to somebody internally, so a friend, a colleague, HR.
Exactly. However your organization operates, what are the big support networks there which I can start going into? And you can go to them with quite a specific problem and say, look, I've identified that this is what's making me quite dissatisfied in this job. How
Yeah.
can you help me? How can you support me as a colleague to feel much better about this process? Organizations usually have huge support networks, which we don't really tap into because we don't really understand what the problem is. But part of this step building is we now have a better idea of what might not be working in our roles or in our jobs. So we can start hunting out the best people to help us.
A lot
If
of
it's
large companies have like employee helplines, don't they, as well?
yeah, they do, which is brilliant. So if you're able to
Support
access
group.
that, it would be an amazing resource to use. And yeah, they're often extremely helpful, especially if you can go in with quite a specific area that you're unhappy with. That's when
Yeah.
you're going to get much better results because again, they can focus much more on that result for you.
Mm-hmm.
If it's an external problem, so you might have identified actually it is the industry I really don't like. I love the people I work with, but the industry as a whole is not for me. It doesn't meet my values. This is
Yeah.
coming up again and again in my dislike column. So it's a bit of a wider, you know, issue that you might need to change. So that might look like a complete career change or a much bigger pivot than something that's happening internally.
Yeah.
That's sort of a bigger, wider issue. But at least now you know what you need to change and why you need to change it. So as you start making these next steps out of an industry or doing a bigger pivot, you've got a much better focus of, okay, what sort of industry would I like to go for? What's me, you know, what's my value list looking like? How can I start implementing my own values into a new industry? What's going to be better aligned for me going forward now at this life stage? So
Yeah.
although it's a bigger pivot and you might need a little bit of coaching or further support to kind of help you do that bigger pivot, at least you know what you need to be going into,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. So either way, if it's an internal one or an external one, at least it's quite specific and you're able to then take a clearer road forward rather
Yeah.
than sort of changing everything altogether.
Yeah. Absolutely. Oh gosh, exciting. And then, so what advice would you give then? I mean, it's going a bit broad, but somebody that is like going to make that complete change, you know, has decided that their job in the industry is not for them, and that is quite a daunting thing. You know, managing their expectations. What advice would you give to them in terms of equipping themselves for that journey?
Yeah, I think you're right. It is a big one, and it's probably one of the bigger moves that we're sort of discussing today. My first advice would be to look at what you love about your job column, which was in
Yeah.
part of step one, and really realizing that there will always be things that you love about your job, even if you feel like it's wrong now for you. to sort of remind yourself that there were things that you found brilliant about the role or the organization that you have been working for, and that it hasn't been a waste of time. There's been things of joy and experience that you would have gained from being in that role. And even though it's not right for you going forward, there'll be so much worthwhile stuff that you have done that you can hold dear to you and take forward. So nothing is ever a waste of time when it's in the working world. We're always working towards something, and we can always take that experience with us.
Yeah.
So that's really comforting. And the second point is looking at your value list again and just sort of reminding yourself, well, what do I want for my future? And realize that you're making a really positive choice. You're making a choice for yourself and for what's going to bring you a lot more joy in the future. So even though it's daunting and it can be sort of a huge undertaking at times to pivot away, you are actually making a positive choice for yourself. The alternative is to stay where you are and be miserable.
Yeah.
Or we can choose to pivot away, taking with us a huge amount of experience under our belts and making an active choice to make sure our future is as closely aligned to our own values as possible, which is really the best way you're going to find satisfaction in a workplace, is if it's closely aligned to who you are and your values and your life.
Yeah, I can understand that at this point in time it'd be really helpful to have a coach while you're navigating those few months, but leaving one role, maybe getting another, and going through those changes and that thought process. And I can imagine there'll be lots of ups and downs and insecurity, and also positive, exciting as well. There's also a good podcast, I suppose, that people could listen to as well. Have you heard of Squiggly Careers?
Yes. That's a great recommendation.
I think for people to know that they're not alone, and we don't have a job for life. A career ladder is not always a straight line for people, and there's quite a lot of joy actually by coming off the beaten path, by
Absolutely, definitely. It's really sort of your approach to it, isn't it? It's sort of thinking, I am making a really active choice here, and it's a choice for me, and to make sure that I am pursuing happiness in my future career. That as a statement is really hard to argue against, isn't it? If a friend said that to you, you'd find it difficult to sort of argue against it. So it's starting to say it to ourselves. And also a really key component of it is to look at the alternative. If I don't move, then what happens? And sort of taking ourselves down that road as well, because often that can lead to sort of, oh gosh, I'm going to get stuck here forever. I'm going to feel like this next week. I'm going to feel like this in a year's time. Oh, okay, that's the choice if I stay on that path. So that can be a really sort of good impetus to make us pivot into something else. And like you say, working with a coach can be massively beneficial at these points, because as you say, you've got a cheerleader right next to you the whole time. You can focus in really specifically in a tailored one-to-one setting. Okay, let's look at this value list. Let's really work on that. Let's build on it. Let's look at, different industries that can really sort of align you with your value base. Let's look at the sort of roles. Let's look at the different opportunities that are ahead. It's sort of a companion in change. And that's hugely beneficial. Also, there's a lot of goal setting around coaching. So it's giving sort of clients and people that we're working with sort of obtainable goals, pushing them further down the road each time, which again can be quite difficult when you're just on your own as an individual. To give yourself a goal and to meet them consistently is almost impossible when you're on your own. No one can do it. It's that's sort of normal that no one can do it, or it's very, very difficult to achieve. So if you've got someone in your corner that sort of knows exactly what road you're on and can sort of help nudge you down that road, that can be a hugely positive part of it as well, and it can make the whole experience feel really joyful. And it should be a really joyful, proactive, engaging process. Change. And although it's got some fear attached to it, it's sort of, like I said right at the beginning, if you're fearful, you're paralyzed. So that sense of action and goal taking can really sort of unfreeze us and sort of push us down the right road.
Brilliant. So that has been such a helpful. I feel I've got so much clarity for me if I was ever looking for another job, or if I was advising somebody else that didn't like their job, what to do. So thank you so much your time today, Emily. Where can people find you, connect with you, and learn more about you and the services that you offer?
Oh, thank you. That's such kind words to say. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you.
So as you can probably see, I work at Power Project Coaching, which is my own sort of coaching business and consultancy, which I run. And my website is hellopowerproject.com. So please have a look. I'm on LinkedIn as well. And I've worked with many clients over the last year, and lots of their sort of positive testimonials and feedback can be found on my LinkedIn page and on my website as well. And just fifth, there was a last sort of fifth point, which I'm just going to slip in just before we finish off. But it was really, this has been a lot about work chat and sort of a really actionable way to start thinking and overcoming that feeling of unhappiness and awfulness that we can feel at work when we're not sort of in the right role or the right organization. The fifth point, though, is to keep the focus on you first. Finally, that's the most important. And although work is such a massive part of our lives, it's not everything. And it's reminding ourselves, you are you. You are not your job. You are you. Yeah. So actually, your job, it might not be right at the moment for loads of different reasons. And obviously, the action steps which I've laid out will hopefully help you identify what is wrong and how to change it. But there's also so much else going on in life as well. And when we're unhappy in something, it can consume everything. If we're not happy in our works, we can sort of get that mistaken that we're not happy in life.
Yeah.
But actually, it's separating those two components. You can be unhappy in your job, but also you can get a lot of joy from your actual life outside of work as well. So that fifth component of the action steps is, although you might be in a bit of a misery with your work, which hopefully you'll overcome, there's also big life outside of that. So it's reconnecting with the joy outside of your working life. What do you love when you're not working? What are the bits that really light you up? What brings you a smile? What brings you laughter? It can be really tiny things or really big things, but it's looking again at what brings me joy outside of work. How can I raise that volume up a little bit? How can I sprinkle a little bit more of that into my life whilst I'm undergoing this big change and transformation and working through things? Yeah. Because if we sort of lower the volume of joy, that's never going to do anyone any good. Particularly when we're going through change and transition and we're using our minds to write lists and start looking at ourselves a bit more closely. It's a really good opportunity to look at what brings us joy in our life and to just turn that volume up a little bit.
Oh, that's really good advice. Do you know, I love that advice. My grandparents, I suppose in a way they didn't have the luxury of being able to pick a career, and I think in those times you had a job, didn't you? And often a job for life, and you needed a job. But they were such good advocates for having hobbies.
And really?
They had brilliant hobbies, and when my nanny's still alive, and all her stories are about the hobbies she did, and
yeah.
You can have a
That's
really
amazing. That's such an inspiration, isn't it?
Yeah, you can have a rich life. I'm not saying stay in a job you hate, but there's, like you said, life is, it's 24 hours. We all get,
Yeah, exactly.
There's other things in life as well as work. So
yeah, it's sort of widening that vision, isn't it? When we're sort of working on something or we're feeling sort of consumed by something, often it's work, and our vision can get quite blinkered by it. And like I was saying, if you feel unhappy at work, it can bleed out into other areas and sort of you write off the rest of life. But actually, if we just widen that scope again and look a bit more broadly, you can have the most awful day ever at work, but then you might do something wonderful afterwards, and it can completely sort of counteract that feeling. Yeah, exactly. It's sort of, there's so many opportunities in life to find the joy, and sometimes we just need a little bit of encouragement or a reminder, just a small reminder. Don't forget those joys outside of work as well, because that's what makes life.
Yeah, and you never know where it might lead as well. You can learn new skills.
Yeah, exactly. You never know. You never know what perspective it might bring. Who you're going to meet or bump into. There's so much opportunity by making sure that, your life outside of work is as healthy as it can be.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, well, thank you so much again, Emily, for your time. Just remind everyone where they can find you and connect with you. and learn
Oh,
more.
thank you. Thanks again. So it's hellopowerproject.com and on LinkedIn as well. And thanks so much everyone for listening. And please get in touch if you've got any follow-up questions or if you need a bit more clarity on anything. I'd be really happy to have a chat with you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Emily. See you soon. Thank you to everyone that watched. Bye.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.